Start here this evening. The wealth of households worldwide is set to contract in 2022 for the first time since the global financial crisis of 2008. This is according to the Allianz Global Wealth Report, which also found that the private wealth of South African households has grown in the past year, with savings up by as much as 15.4% compared to the previous year. This is the fastest increase for South Africa since the global financial crisis. Well, what does this all mean, really, as the sentiment is low in terms of economic growth, debt levels are high, and credit defaults are rising for households? To make sense of it all, we are joined by Dr. Arne Holzhausen, the head of wealth and insurance at Allianz. Dr. Holzhausen, thank you very much for your time. For the third year in a row, global financial assets have grown by double digits in 2021. Explain exactly how you are measuring household wealth in this report.
Yeah, hello, first of all, and thank you for having me here. No, I mean, what we do is we look into the statistics and we count the beans, so to say. We look how much bank deposits private households have. We look how much stock, how much equity, how much insurance contracts they possess. And then we calculate the overall aggregate numbers. And this is quite a big number. I mean, if you look at the global as a whole, as a world as a whole, it's 233 trillion euros. It's basically the same in dollars right now today because we have this parity exchange rate. So it's a huge amount of money. I mean, all the private households around the world could buy all the debt, all the sovereign debt 3 times over. So the reality is that the world is a very, very rich place. The big question mark is what do the households with all this wealth, and how this wealth is distributed across the globe. And here, some question marks, and here the story gets even more interesting. But overall, we have seen that there's a lot of wealth, and this had grown in the past year, and especially grown thanks to the booming stock markets around the world. The booming stock markets were clearly the side effect, or were powered by central banks, by liquidity injections, what we have seen all over the past years. But now, as you alluded to, we enter a different era.
Dr. Holzhausen, you are saying that basically private households of the world are much richer than the governments. The picture you have painted in this report is of a contraction in the year 2022, and you have listed a number of issues as having an impact on household wealth, including the war in Ukraine, and global wealth is set to drop by 2.3% this year. So it doesn't seem, people are not feeling the riches that you are actually talking about, because the rich have continued to make money even during COVID-19, a period where we were expecting some contraction in household wealth. What we have learned in the past 2 years does not correlate seemingly with what this report has to say.
No, well, yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right. We have a huge concentration of wealth, especially on the global level. If we look at our data, we come to the conclusion that 10% of the population have or own almost 90% of all wealth in the world. So there's a huge concentration. It's clearly that most of the rich people sit in North America, in Western Europe, and nowadays also in China, in Asia. This is the fact. But on the other hand, you have also seen that the last 2 years, especially with Corona and with the lockdowns and with the experience that we were not allowed to go out, that we were not allowed to consume as we used to do, there was a lot of forced savings, excess savings as we call it, because simply people were helped through the pandemic by fiscal support measures, but were not able to spend the money as they did in the past. And the result was a huge increase in savings. We have seen that savings savings, fresh savings, jumped by more than 50% in the last 2 years. And this also fueled the increase of financial assets. And this was a widespread phenomenon. It was not only the rich that get even richer, it was also normal households, middle-class households that were able to build excess savings, for sure at a lower level, but we have seen that this kind of phenomenon was widespread and could be detected in all households around the globe.
And we are now seeing the return of debt in households. As the report says, in emerging markets like South Africa, households' debt has increased with double-digit growth rates over the past decade, more than 5 times the speed seen in advanced economies. Debt is a huge part of what we are seeing right now for households.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if we now turn to this year and looking into the future, then clearly the outlook is much bleaker than what we have seen in the past few years, especially. As you mentioned, there's Ukraine war, there's the energy crisis, there's a cost of living crisis, and we enter a global recession probably at the end of this year, by beginning of next year. So people are really stressed. Households are stressed to make ends meet. And that is also one reason why we see this increase in debt. For sure, I mean, if you compare the development of emerging markets with advanced markets, you have to take into account that the debt levels overall are still much lower than in advanced markets. We have in factor of 10, so to speak, in personal or per capita debt in these markets compared, if you compare advanced economies with emerging economies. And still taking the example of South Africa, for example, the debt ratio, then if we then compare that with the overall economic activity with GDP, we still see modest levels. This is around, it's below 50%. So we would not assume or expect that this debt crisis is just around the corner, but for sure we have to take into account that now income are stagnating, even falling, that we will see unemployment rising. So the overall environment gets much more challenging for households in the next years, in the coming years, because of the more bleaker and the darkened outlook for the overall global economy.
South Africa is ranked 31st in the world in terms of net financial assets per capita for the year 2021. It's not a surprise because we are ranked the most unequal society in the world, because 10% of the wealth pyramid owns the wealth population own 85% of all net financial assets. This is speaking largely to inequalities once again in South Africa.
Yes, for sure. I mean, overall, if you look at aggregates, it's average. South Africa is not doing badly. I mean, so overall, the average per capita financial assets are higher than, say, in Brazil, are higher than in Russia, and also higher, not to speak of India, for sure. So overall, if you compare South Africa with the other BRICS, with the other big emerging economies, South Africa is in a good position. The bitterness or the problem, or the biggest problem in South Africa is the inequality, as you mentioned. And here we see that is only very slowly improving. I mean, we have seen there's a slide by 2 percentage points fall in the wealth concentration, but it's not enough. And this is really a pity, because the last couple of years were not too bad overall, but also in South Africa we have seen growth, and this was a waste opportunity not to improve the outcome of wealth distribution, not to strive for a more inclusive growth. But again, I mean, this is a plague that is not only seen in South Africa. We see it also in Latin America. We see it in North America. US comes very close to South Africa if you talk about inequality. And even here in Europe, where we always boast or are very proud to be a more egalitarian, we have a very strong social welfare state. Even here in Europe, inequality is on the rise. So this is something that really has to be urgently addressed by policymakers, because otherwise all the wealth will not lead to better outcome, to better lives, but more to more anger and to more distorted and conflictionary politics.
A very scary picture you've painted there for South Africa indeed. Dr. Arne Holzhausen is the head of insurance and wealth at Allianz, giving us the details of the Allianz Global Wealth Report, which says in 2021 we made a lot of money, but in 2022 we should expect to get in more debt globally.